Thank you very much, Dr. Ragoonath. A number of issues raised, one of legitimacy in the society and whether or not we have a constitution that does that for us. But I want to start the discussion here and amongst all of us. I think I asked if there is a microphone for the audience because I very much want you to participate. I see one or two coming down, so that's great. So we get some microphones for people to pass. But let me provoke not only Dr. Ragoonath, but all three of you, because you all said it in different ways. And I think David concluded on it himself. Don't we have legitimacy in the society that you all acknowledge that you have the two blocks, the two major tribes, and they agree with their parties that all we need is a little tinkering at the margins of the Constitution. What are you talking about? The society is comfortable with the Constitution as it is. As a question for all three of you.
I will start by saying that a lot of the people know that the Constitution is not working for them. However, they recognize that if we have to get wholesale reform of the Constitution, we are in trouble. The Constitution, for instance, Olabisi talked about Section 54 of the Constitution, which gives you various clauses of the Constitution. In order that you amend them, you either have to have a 3/4 or 2/3 majority. But clearly, look at the times when we had constitutional reform in Trinidad.
But Dr. Ragoonath, that's not my point. My point is that people agree, people acquiesce to the Constitution. They're comfortable with it. The Prime Minister says we have to do a little. In fact, Basdio Pandey was famous of saying that all we need is a little tinkering here and there. People are comfortable with it. They vote every election year in large numbers for one party or the other. So what are we talking about? People want it as it is.
Okay. I think sometimes we have to look at, yes, at one stage people will say this is what we want, especially if it is a comment that is made around an election issue or when you think that your party is being attacked or something like that. But putting aside that, if you look at other kinds of conversations, some of them not necessarily said in the open, some of them said undercover. Like, for example, look at the public service. Why is it only African people in the public service? Or who getting all the contracts? And things like that. Or look at, local government, and then what we do resort to burning tires if we want to get something done. In many ways, people are saying, if even they do not say we want to change the Constitution, people are saying our lives are not being, we are not living the way we would want to live. Our society is not really taking care of us in a particular way. And when you read down to it, when you drill down, it is a constitutional issue that they are addressing.
David?
Olabisi just said. And that's one of the issues that we had in the CRF of how do you link Constitution as a legal document, as the many clauses setting out the institutions of state, to the issue of governance generally and how people are living their lives, because most people don't make the connection between the two. And that is why discussions and forums and debates around constitutional reform tend to attract relatively few people, because people don't make the connection between the problems that they're experiencing in their everyday lives and the issues.
So is it that they're comfortable with it? The status quo?
No, they're not comfortable with the status quo, which is why you have protests every Monday morning in the country. Why, for example, people said that we had to remove Mr. Manning, and there was that huge groundswell which the partnership rode into government because of hubris and his abuse of power and so on. They identified that perhaps with the individual Mr. Manning. They didn't necessarily identify that with the Constitution per se, and the need to change the system of governance, quite apart from changing the individual who may have been there. That is why, for example, people feel very unhappy about the abuse of office by this partnership government, all right? But they don't necessarily relate the abuse of office to the relations of power that have been established by the Constitution, and therefore the need to change the Constitution.
Yes.
As a process of awakening consciousness around that is critical.
Bishnu seems to have been stayed. You want to say something before we open the discussion?
All that I would say is that while people may seem to want to say that the Constitution needs a little bit of tinkering, my bigger question to that is how many people actually understand the Constitution? They don't. I go to a class and I read 2 clauses from the Constitution. In fact, yesterday I was in a class and I said, okay, let's go. Section 75(1) of the Constitution. There's a cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago, and that cabinet has to respond for the direction of Trinidad and Tobago in making all the decisions respective for Trinidad and Tobago. And students were there stunned. So wait a minute, the cabinet has all of this power. And I said, yes, if you read the Constitution. But then very few people read the Constitution. Very few people, all they know with the Constitution, we have a parliament, we have a president, we have a prime minister, we have a cabinet. All the other institutions within the Constitution, people say, I never knew that these things were covered in the Constitution.
If I wanted the conversation to go on between the panelists and myself, I would ask them who's responsible for that. All 3 of them have been active in different ways, and they obviously have mobilized people towards action. But this is not my conversation. There are some microphones around. Please come take one. Yes, sir. Look, somebody, if we have one down here and one up there, somewhere midway, we can share them. One gentleman here. Let me stand.
Hi, good evening. I really enjoyed.
You want to just tell us who you are? It's not necessary, but it helps the conversation.
Well, first I'm a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago.
That's important.
So,
That's the most
and I'm
important
old enough to
thing.
drink, smoke, and vote. So that's the first thing. But I'm also a graduate student here
Right.
at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies. And I really enjoyed the presentations. Well, the discussions, or we call reasonings. And something that I was interested to note is that Minister Ramadan, in an interview, when he was asked the same question as Dr. as it relates to his participation as the chairperson on the Reform Committee, it would be that, and he argued that because it was part of the political mandate of the Congress of the People, and it was made as part of their manifesto and platform, that he had the ability to lead it, right? Because that was the mandate in terms of the election became his mandate, right? Similar to argument like what Barack Obama would have done in his second term for the continuation of healthcare. And I found this very interesting because I think it made certain assumptions about the state, but also perspectives on the role of the state and the way political parties operate in it. Dr. Abdulah highlighted something which is interesting. I think we have loud sheeple and very quiet sheeple, right? People who are sheep, you know. So, meaning that we have some people who will wear Kamla, why she paved my road on Badesi Trace or Sunset Drive. And then we have the next extreme, which is a kind of repressive tolerance by the state for like Kublal Singh down south, and they'll bring the army, right, for your protests. Meaning that the state continues to be abstract to many people as an institution, and we look at individuals. And I'm going to tie it into the question that I have, in that we had the post-budget forum, and I thought it would be the media's responsibility as well as the cabinet to have the opposition always respond to the budget and have an opposition member, not just the opposition leader, to present on it. Likewise, I think we really missed the opportunity as a civilization to grow in the moment for the reform, in spite of our decision as a people. And what we had to question, I would like, is therefore, why didn't we consider what constitutes a consultation? Meaning, what are the terms of references for a consultation? Is there a forum to make one valid, to make one legitimate? Do consultations now have, not just by geography, in terms of zones in Trinidad, but certain stakeholders, like primary schools as well as secondary school essay competitions and so on. Is there a month before it is proposed to Parliament that we invest or allow civil society groups or tertiary education institutes to have fora? So the question is, do we have an imagination about what would be the type of consultations we would have which would make our opinions legitimate? And the decision, whether it be by 10 persons, right, or 100 persons, it doesn't matter, because what civilization had the opportunity to do is debate and contest the ideas for legitimacy.
Thank you very much. Perhaps Olabisi, one of the first points he made was that Prakash Ramada says, well, if we promise that, why shouldn't I be there? And in fact, Buttiwari said, well, boy, what are you all making fuss about? Since Williams went to Marlborough House, and then in 76 he changed in the constitution, is we time now? What are you arguing about?
Yeah, this is one. I like starting at that point, and in case I forget, I want to come back eventually to the last point about what constitutes a consultation, because I think that you just started the discussion right there. Sorry, I wasn't writing. This question, we have come to accept that we want political parties to have a manifesto. We want them to write down what they are going to do, and therefore it comes as if it is almost constitutional, that when they get into Parliament, they are supposed to live up to the promises, that is another constitutional word, that they made in the manifesto. And it's amazing how we have bought that over a number of years, because we have been saying that they had that in their manifesto and they did not fulfill that. And therefore, what they have turned that around to beat us with. That, well, we are doing the right thing in that we are, living up to our promises of the manifesto. Now, you see, as from now, I don't want no manifesto, right? You keep your manifesto. Write whatever you want in a paper, keep it behind doors, right? But I think that we should have an anti-manifesto position right now as far as politicians are concerned. We don't want no manifesto, right? Because
but then you leave all you leave for the campaign is over talk and mudslinging.
Well, what has the manifesto changed from that? What has the manifesto changed from that?
Touché.
But coming to the last point that you were making, what constitutes a consultation? And this is the kind of thing, I'm so glad I want to use that. This is the kind of thing that we have to look at. What constitutes the process? And you just put some things inside on the table, right? In terms of going to primary schools, going to secondary schools, getting civil society, what constitutes the consultation and what comes out of it?
Okay.
I don't have anything else to add. You started.
Anybody else? That's it. Dr. Peter Gonzalez.
Yes, I think all three panelists raised the fundamental issue about how do we go from here to there. And that's the issue basically of the political strategy for constitutional reform. We discussed constitutional reform here ad nauseum. I mean, I've been hearing it since I was a little boy, all through Golden Ragoonath. And still, no one has really seen it fit to come up with a political strategy to deal with what Bishnu calls the bipolarity in the society. That is the fundamental problem. It makes no sense getting involved in a lot of what we have here, armchair discussion about constitutional reform, when we know as soon as we go outside there's no real political mechanism to bring it about. I mean, look what you face in the parliament right now. You have the leader of the opposition said he has no interest in proportional representation. The ruling party has a document before it in which there is proportional representation for the first time, and I want to say something about that in a while. Yet still, it is not brought before the parliament. And they said, maybe later on we will bring it. And then the opposition said, they didn't bring it because I've heard the Attorney General say he don't want that. So that you have to have somewhere a strong political lobby, a force that must be such that they have to take you into account on certain specific issues. We focus a lot on things like the environment, human rights, and groups form around certain issues, but we don't have a political force around some of these major constitutional issues. And I believe that across the divide we have in this country, there is somehow a feeling, I believe it may well be the majority, because if you look at a lot of the articles in the press, if you look at a lot of all the top officials, the top lawyers, and what they all say in this country, there are some fundamental political issues. You would even have people like Mr. Basio Panda saying that we must have control of parliament by the government in terms of finances. And that's one of the issues that we don't talk about much, but it's a fundamental issue. How do you control the financial spending of the government by the parliament? But there are two on which we have made some progress, in that for the first time, we have a document, the government has a document in which we have, I think, two fundamental reforms that have come up. One is proportional representation, and the other one is the separation of the executive from the parliament. I think I may not fully agree with how the proposal is fashioned, but at least it tries to deal with what I believe to be a fundamental issue. Now, how did that get there? That got there simply because, and I go back to the manifesto issue, but that the COP, somehow trying to be a third force, came up with the idea that we needed fundamental constitutional reform. So they articulated, and the chairman of the Constitutional Reform Commission was a COP person, so that found its way there, two basic reforms. So that there is a demand in some way in this society for constitutional reform. The problem is, how do we get it through the process? How do we get it through recognizing what Bishnu has just said? It is very easy for these polarized parties to articulate a vision of, you're trying to undermine me, you're trying to stop me from staying in power or getting in power, and therefore I'm against proportional representation, or I'm against separating the parliament from the executive, and all of that, what you hear. So I'm yet to find out really how do we do it. I don't have fully the answer, but I think somewhere it lies in somewhere having a certain amount of political power, a certain amount of strength that you could exercise in such a way that you force people, okay? For instance, if it is true that the PNM is the only party against proportional representation, so I hear some people in the UNC say, like, they have no problem with it, but they're not bringing it because they know the opposition is going to refuse it, which I don't accept. But how do we test that? How do we put the PNM to the test? They say, well, let us see where you stand on this. Let us see we understand you're the only man against that. Is that really true? And we demonstrate in the road or whatever we do on some, because we don't have the referendum mechanism, which I agree with Bishnu. If we had it, maybe this was a way of a single issue being put to the people that they could try and resolve. But I believe, and I think all panelists are correct, there is at the bottom of the society a concern that we don't have the control over government and we don't have the representation. And that you need, look at the Shogunas West. Shogunas West is the revolution in the country on the issue of separating the constituency representative from being in the executive. That's what it was all about. He has three roles. He's a legislator, he's a constituency representative, as well as he's a minister. But he can't do it. He can't do all of them. That's why you have the problem outside.
Okay. Anybody else?
This is your portion, This is your portion. These people here can talk forever. But participation, how do we mobilize? The question raised over there, and indeed raised here, how do we mobilize the society that we believe